I don't know if it happened this way or not, but that really doesn't matter. What's important is the story. And so this morning, the story that I'm going to talk about is the story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt. Now this is Reverend Don's condensed interpretation, Cliff Notes version. And it's kind of hitting the highlights at that. So Moses was born into captivity. The Hebrews had been in Egypt for 400 years, about 10 generations, in slavery. Another whole story would be how Moses escaped from Egypt, got into the desert and became a shepherd. But while he was a shepherd in the desert to the east, he received a command from God to go back to Egypt and lead the Israelites to freedom, lead them to the promised land. And of course, the first thing that he saw when he thought when he did that is who, me? And the burning bush replied, who else is standing there, you fool? Yes, I'm talking to you. But he had a slave mentality, even though he'd been free for a long time. But he went ahead, he obeyed the command, he returned to Egypt. He was told that all of the people who wanted to kill him were dead, that he didn't have to worry about it. And he was told to go to the Pharaoh and ask to let the Hebrew people leave. And he did that. And the Pharaoh said no. So Moses went back to God and he said no. God says, go back and tell him that if he doesn't let the people go, he's going to get some plagues on him. I'm going to inflict a plague on him. Well, this played out. He went, and sure enough, that finally the Pharaoh said no, and the Lord inflicted the plague on Egypt. And finally, the Pharaoh says, okay, take away the plague and you can go. Okay. So the plague went away, and Pharaoh said, change my mind. You can't go. And all the while, the Hebrews were saying, we can't go. The Pharaoh has a huge army, and they're strong men, and they're battle-tested, and they've got equipment, and they can kill us all. We can't leave. And meanwhile, Moses is telling him, yes, you can leave because you've got God on your side, and God will protect you. Each one of the plagues got worse and worse, and I forgot all the plagues, but there's a whole bunch of them. And I remember the dust, because that would have driven my mother crazy. But we had the plague of dust, and then they had the plague of flies. And each time the Pharaoh would say, okay, stop, I'll let your people go. And so they'd stop the plague, the Lord would stop the plague, and they'd say, I changed my mind, you don't get to go. Finally, it got worse and worse. We had the flies, those were real bad, and then the locusts. I remember the locusts. Yeah. Still, Pharaoh's changing his mind. So this one is the one to stop them all. And this one was the plague, the firstborn of everybody dies. And that one got to everybody because it was all the human firstborn, all of the cattle, all of the sheep, all of everything. The firstborn died except for the Hebrews. And they had put the mark of the Lamb on their door, and they knew, then the Lord knew to pass over that house and take the firstborn of the other houses, and that's the beginning of the Passover tradition. And with that, finally, Pharaoh broke. And Pharaoh and all of the Egyptians finally said, get the hell out of here. We don't even want you here anymore. And in fact, it went so far as they gave them their gold, they gave them silver, they gave them bronze, they even gave them their best clothes and said, leave, please, now, no more plagues. Oh, so that finally was enough to get the Hebrews to leave Egypt. And they headed off across the desert. And they were doing okay until they came to the Red Sea, and they kind of had to stop there, and they weren't too sure what they were going to do. And then they looked behind them, and they saw this big old cloud. And they put two and two together, and they knew that that was a Pharaoh, and he changed his mind again. Well, of course, he woke up the next morning, and there weren't any Hebrews to do all the work. They had to do something. Well, we got to go get our slaves, because we can't be peeling our own grapes and doing all this work. So they mounted up 600 chariots and their fastest horses and their strongest men, and went after them. So now the Hebrew people, oh man, they know this is bad. And they know that that army is going to get there and it's going to kill them all. So they think, we need to surrender right now and go back to being slaves. They still had that slave mentality. Well, Moses asked God what to do. God told him to take that same staff that he turned into a serpent, hold it up, and the Red Sea is going to part. And that's just what happened. And the Hebrews got across the Red Sea just about the time Pharaoh shows up with his 600 chariots, and they try crossing the Red Sea, and the winds quit blowing, and whoosh, back came all the water, drowned the Pharaoh, drowned all of his men, and the Hebrews are safe on the other side. Now, even though not only had they escaped and they were free, but their captor, the Pharaoh, had been vanquished. So even the guy that was holding them there had been vanquished. But was that enough to break their slave mentality? No. They started across the desert, and 3 days into it, they didn't have any water. And they said, oh man, we can't make this without any water. We got to go back to Egypt and be slaves again so we can have water. So Moses asked for water. And sure enough, they come around the next corner and there's an oasis. Oh, isn't that great? They go to drink the water and it's bitter. It's terrible. It's really bad water. So, oh God, what are we going to do? And he says, oh, there's a plant right over there. Throw it in. It's going to make it good. So they threw in this plant, and the water turned sweet, and they fed the cattle and the sheep and all the people, and their life is good. But they still felt like that they were slaves. Even though their captor had been vanquished, they'd been proven over and over and over again that their God was going to take care of them. They still felt like that they were slaves. And this continued. For water, then they didn't have any food. And God's going to give them manna. So then they get manna from heaven. But they still don't embrace it. Finally, they make it to the promised land. They get to Canaan. And there they are. And they're ready to go in. So Moses gets a bright idea, and they take 12, there are 12 tribes, they got their 12 leaders, strongest ones, and they send them into Canaan to scope the place out and let's see what this is like. So they went in, and they were gone for a long time. They came back, they all had a big meeting, and 10 of the 12 said, oh, we got trouble. These are big guys. They are big, they are fast, they are tough. They look a lot like the Philadelphia Eagles defense. We don't stand a chance. We don't stand a chance.
Only if you're the New England Patriots.
Well, or the New Orleans Saints. Well, I think they vanquished the Saints, didn't they?
No, they vanquished the New England.
But the point is, they had the belief that they could not do that. And in our teaching, what we know to be true, what our beliefs are, we're going to manifest. So guess what happened when they went in and tried to take the land away from the Canaanites? They got beat. They got beat really bad. They had to go back into the desert for another generation. They went back for another 40 years. And until the next generation had a bigger and better idea of what they could be. Once they could lose that mentality of being a slave. And I love the sacred reading day. Linda, I don't know how you come up with these. This is amazing. You and Jenna must have some kind of a thing. Jenna, to come up with the music that you do is, I don't know how you do it, but thank you. Yes. And thanks, Eric, to the choir. Jessica, that was beautiful. That was awesome. Thank you so much. Put it from the sacred reading. It's time to break the cycle. The truth is that we are perfect children of the greatest love of all, living for all eternity, experiencing and growing to know ourselves in so many life expressions. We are children of the Most High. And when we can take that mentality, a child mentality, the children of the Most High mentality, instead of a slave mentality, we can reframe our entire lives, how we look at everything. The theme for this month is spiritual laws, which is a lot more comfortable for me than the last couple months. It's sort of my arena. The topic for today is supposed to be direct contact with the infinite. But we are all, every one of us, in constant contact with the infinite at every moment of our lives, because we are those perfect, beautiful children of God. Child mentality. You are a child of God and not a slave. But it is so easy to fall into slave thinking. I am a slave to this addiction. I am a slave to poverty. I am a slave to my depression. I'm a slave to mediocrity. And the worst is I'm a slave to my past. Slave mentality limits our lives, and the divine wants to experience all of the good, all of the God that it can. And I want to go back to the sacred reading again. Jane Beach is awesome. As you've probably noticed, the human experience can be messy. We stumble and fall a lot, which leads to insecurities and doubts. It's easy to forget the perfection that we are, so self-judgment sets in. Oh boy, does it ever. Self-judgment steps in. We've all been through our disappointments and unfair situations because of negative things of the past, even mistakes we've made. It's easy to have the wrong image of ourselves. Too many times we've developed a slave mentality where we don't pray bold prayers. We don't affirm and embrace our desires. We don't expect good breaks because we feel unworthy. We are told that we are all sons of God and daughters. It's time to stop thinking about what we were, what we've been through, or the mistakes we've made. When we realize who we really are, a son and daughter of the Most High God, we can begin to think differently and live differently as we begin to live in the flow of life. Powerful. We've all had things that come against us. Every one of us. Nobody is above that. Nobody that I have ever known has lived their life without challenges. But all of those things, all of the challenges, all of the things that come to us in our life, all of the effects are all temporary. Our Buddhist brothers and sisters have taught us about the temporary nature of that. The only thing that is permanent, the only thing that is absolutely permanent and consistent is God's love for you. The divine creative force of the universe absolutely loves each and every one of you, each and every one of us. We are all children of the Most High. It's the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. It's the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Back when I worked for GE, I'd often be called for meetings in the lower 48. And coming from Alaska with the time difference and flying back, I hated that. Because what I'd end up having to do to be to a meeting on time would be to take a red eye out of here and fly all night and then walk into a meeting blurry-eyed and unattentive. So what I started, I think I did that twice. And from then on, I told my boss, I'm going a day early, period. That's it. It's my time, but you pick up the stamps. You pick up the hotel and the meal. So I would always go down a full day early. Well, I had a big meeting and I had a presentation to make, so I was really focused on that. I wanted to do a good job and make a good presentation. I went down a day early, and I practiced in my room, and I was all ready to go, and it got to be dinner time, and I went down to the restaurant area down there, and I didn't know what's going on. I went in, kind of busy over on one side, but it's almost empty over on the other side, and I preferred that because I wanted to, table for one. I thought it would be by myself. So I sat down, and pretty soon a waiter walked by, and he didn't stop. He didn't say anything. He just walked right on by. Pretty soon another waiter came walking by. Didn't stop. And after about 5 waiters went by, and some of them were kind of friendly. They'd smile and nod and walk right on by. Nobody brought me a menu. They didn't bring me any water. I just sat there, and I was sitting there. This is the worst customer service I have ever in my life experienced. I have never been in a restaurant with poor service. Finally, I just got fed up. I'm going to go talk to somebody. So I got up out of my chair. I walked around and went over to that busier side and looked down, and there was the buffet table. The meal was a buffet. You were supposed to go in and pick up your plate and walk through the line. The Father had provided everything that I wanted. It was already right there. But in my narrow blinders, I couldn't accept it. I couldn't see it. It is the Father's good pleasure to give you everything that you want. Another good example of that is the prodigal son. We know the story of the prodigal son. He got his inheritance first and went out and, spent it all on women and booze, and then he wasted the rest. And he finally he finally made it back to dear old dad, and he'd had it rough. Boy, he was slopping the hogs, and then it was so bad he ended up eating the stuff that he was feeding the hogs just so he'd have something to eat. So he was thinking he'd go back and he'd beg dad for a job as a servant. He begged dad to be a servant to him. So he was going back expecting that, but instead, Dad rolls out the red carpet. He gives him a brand new coat. He gives him everything he wants. And they kill the fatted calf. They throw a big party for him. And that's just how it is with us. The divine is waiting for us at every moment. The divine is waiting for us to recognize our own child nature, our own child of God nature, our own sonship, our own daughtership. The divine is waiting to give us that. The infinite is not interested in your past. Just like the Father wasn't interested in what the prodigal son did. He's just happy to have you there. And so the divine creative force of the universe, that infinite intelligence that made all of everything, has that same attitude toward you. Does not care about your past. I can just picture this. Here's the divine looking down at us as we march around in our slave mentality, and it's saying, doesn't she know that she is my daughter? Doesn't he know that he is my son? When we recognize our inherent divinity, we are able to move from slave or victim thinking to positive thinking. The divine created us to be whole, to be prosperous, to be healthy, and to be loving. And when we recognize our inherent divinity, we think differently. When we recognize our inherent divinity, we talk differently. And when we recognize our inherent divinity, we act differently. Ernest Holmes wrote, "We all have access to the parent mind, but we do not all use this direct access because we are so used to judging from external facts. It is difficult for us to get away from the apparent long enough to judge the real." It's so hard to step away from that slave thinking, the slave thought. So how do we make a transition from being a slave to being a child of God? How do we take that? Guess what? It's what we do at this center 7 days a week. You can take classes. Classes will help you to see your inherent divinity. We have a powerful thing that we do in Foundations class where we go back and we look at our negative self-talk. And what a joy it is to see the light bulb come on in some students when they realize how often they're saying, I can't do that. And I get to sit through that time after time after time. And each time I become back aware of more negative self-talk that I have. Too old, too short, too fat. Boy, and I love that song. You know, Jessica, I swear, I'm going to get that and the recording. Every morning when I get on the treadmill, I'm going to say, let there be less of me. You can read. Every day you can read. We've got this awesome, awesome magazine. It's like $5 a month. And if you can't afford it, see me. I will get you a copy of the magazine. If you do nothing else than read the daily guides, it's worth it because what it does is it reframes your day. It frames you into a place of positive thinking instead of slave thinking. Meditate. It's one of our basic spiritual practices. You know, in Foundations, we start off and some people are praying, meditating for 5 or 7 minutes a day. We've got our prac students and I think they're up to 10. By the time we're in practitioner training, hopefully people are meditating for 30 minutes to an hour a day. And what a gift meditation is. Prayer, what a gift. And centering prayer. Twice a month, the first and third Saturdays, we have centering prayer here. What a gift to come into centering prayer. You can attend service here on Sunday and our workshops. And what I've noticed also, even if you can't make it to service, what we recently learned, we're in the process of rolling out a new website. We'd hope to have it done today, but minister kind of made a few mistakes. Maybe next week. But what you can do is you can go to our website, CSLalaska.org, or go to YouTube and look for Alaska Center for Spiritual Living on YouTube and find us, and you can get the videos of this. And what we have found is that number of people viewing the videos is just about equal to the number of you here each week.
Great.
Now that's not an invitation. It doesn't mean you don't get to come every week, you know. But if you want to stay home in your jammies with Shirley May at the Bedside Baptist, you can do that. Or if you can't drive all the way in from Birchwood, you can watch the video. What a gift that is. So I want to speak to the people that are watching just a minute. And thank you for watching. Thank you for paying attention to this. And we really appreciate this. What a gift technology is for all of us. I think I was supposed to say that at the very first and I forgot. How do we know then when we have been able to make that shift from a slave mentality or a slave consciousness to one of a child mentality, a child of God mentality? And it's simple. It's from the outcomes. It's from the effects. Those temporary things, they can be pretty nasty or they can be really positive and good. So you can look at the effects and see what the outcomes are because your thoughts are the things that have created it all. It's an outcome-based deal. And it reminds me of another good story about, outcome-based. There was a minister that passed away and he arrived at the pearly gates. And St. Peter was there admitting people in, and it was kind of a short line. He ended up in line behind a guy with a loud T-shirt and Levi's and a ball cap. So he waited, and the guy in front of him got up, and St. Peter says, I need your name and occupation. The guy says, yeah, he says, I'm Larry Cohen, cab driver in New York City. And, just a moment, St. Peter looks down. Oh, there you are. Here you go. He says, and he hands him a golden staff and a silk robe and sends him off into heaven. So the pastor, he's pretty pleased. He says, okay, he says, I'm Pastor Don Smith. I'm the minister over at St. Mary's Center. And St. Peter looks down at his list and he tick. Oh, there you are. And reaches down and he hands him a wooden staff and a cotton robe. I said, well, there must be a mistake here. He says, that guy in front of me, he got a gold staff. How's come I get this old wooden one? And St. Peter says, well, up here everything is outcome based. He says, you got to understand, when you preached, people slept. When he drove his cab, people prayed. Okay, the takeaway. We got to wrap this up. We're out of time today. Takeaway. And this is what I want you to know. And this demonstrates this shift. You are not a sick person trying to get well. You are a healthy person who is fighting sickness. You are not an addict who is in chains to his addiction. You are a free person who is fighting addiction. You are not a poor person trying to get ahead in the world. You are a prosperous person who is escaping poverty. You are not a lonely person trying to find a friend. You are a loving person who meets new friends every day. And so it is with that awareness of our own inherent divinity that we can make this shift. And I invite my colleagues, the practitioners, to join me in holding all of you, holding all of us, holding all of everyone in love and light, and just simply knowing that each and every one of us are a beloved child of God. And that as we live and move and have our being on this earthly plane, we come up against things in our lives, but we have the confidence and the poise to step back and allow that divine current to flow through us. We are not here alone because we are beloved children of God. And we know that that indwelling presence is with us at this and in every moment. And so we know that those of us that are facing the apparent lack of limitation, of not enoughness, we know that we live in an abundant universe. It's more than we can accept. The buffet line is just the other side of the table. We know that it is the Father's good pleasure to give us. And for those of us that are experiencing health challenges, we know that at the cellular level, at the molecular level, at the atomic level, and even the subatomic level, there is an inherent intelligence within us that knows perfection. And it is that perfection that we call on right now. Perfection in health. And for those of us that feel separation not only from one another, but separation from God, we know that that is absolutely impossible. Because as a child of God, we carry God DNA with us wherever we go, whatever we do. We are children of the Most High. And so we just give thanks. And now as we stop and move forward into this world at this time, we do so with a poise and a confidence. Because we are children of God. We give thanks, we let it go, we let it be, and so it is.